The rumble of motorcycle engines shattered the quiet desert morning. Victoria Parker tightened her grip on the steering wheel, her eyes flicking between the road ahead and the side mirrors of her 18-wheeler. They were coming. Max let out a low warning growl from the passenger seat, ears perked, his sharp gaze fixed on the approaching riders. Duke, positioned behind Victoria's seat, remained still, but she could feel the tension coiled in his body. Both dogs sensed the shift in the air. Danger was close. "Easy, boys," Victoria murmured, her voice calm despite the adrenaline surging through her veins. The sand scorpions had been trailing her for the past 10 miles, their dark leather vests standing out against the rising Arizona sun. A pack of predators circling their prey. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that Victoria Parker was no ordinary truck driver. She reached down subtly, feeling the weight of the reinforced duffel bag at her feet. Inside, alongside a first aid kit and extra supplies, lay the tactical gear she'd hoped she wouldn't need. A sharp crackle from the CB radio jolted her focus. "Vic, you copy?" It was Elena, another trucker she'd spoken to earlier. "They're closing in. You got a plan?" Victoria's jaw tightened. "Working on it." Through the mirror, she counted at least a dozen riders, their formation tightening. They were boxing her in, forcing her toward the shoulder of the road. Ahead, the open highway stretched endlessly, but she knew better than to think she could outrun them in an 18-wheeler. The lead rider, a burly man with a scar running from his temple to his jaw, raised his hand, signaling her to pull over. Venom Jackson, the infamous leader of the Sand Scorpions. Victoria exhaled slowly. All right. If they wanted to play, they'd get a game they weren't prepared for. She tapped the dashboard twice in unspoken command. Max and Duke shifted instantly, their bodies snapping into alert mode. Years of military training etched into every muscle, every movement. Venom pulled up alongside her window, his voice barely audible over the roar of engines. "Pull over, lady. Now." Victoria gave him a slow, measured look, then flicked her headlights twice. A signal. A warning. Venom grinned, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Suit yourself." From the corner of her eye, she saw movement, one of the bikers reaching into his jacket. "Now." Victoria yanked the wheel hard. The 18-wheeler roared to the right, kicking up a storm of dust and gravel as the sudden motion caught the bikers off guard. Max barked sharply, and Duke let out a deep, guttural growl as the truck veered. Chaos erupted. Victoria felt the weight of the truck shift as the massive tires skidded slightly on the gravel shoulder, but she kept control. Behind her, the Sand Scorpions scrambled to adjust, some swerving wildly to avoid collision, others accelerating to flank her from the sides. She didn't have much time. One of the bikers, a lanky man with a snake tattoo coiling up his neck, pulled a shotgun from his saddle holster. Victoria's stomach clenched, but her hands were steady. Max and Duke were already locked onto the threat, bodies poised like coiled springs, awaiting her command. "All right, boys," she muttered under her breath. "Let's give them a proper introduction." Her left hand flicked the modified switch beneath the dashboard. Instantly, the truck's side compartments popped open, releasing a cloud of high-intensity tactical flashers, perfectly legal, but blinding at close range. The effect was immediate. Bikers cursed, swerving blindly, some dropping back to avoid the disorienting lights. Venom, still at her window, shielded his eyes with his forearm, shouting something she didn't bother deciphering. The snake-tattooed biker wasn't as lucky. Caught mid-aim, he flinched just as he pulled the trigger. The shotgun blast went wide, peppering the air harmlessly. But Victoria wasn't about to wait for a second attempt. With precise timing, she slammed the brakes. The sudden deceleration threw everything into chaos. The Sand Scorpions weren't expecting it. The bikers tailing her had no time to react. Tires screeched. Metal crunched. The closest rider smashed into her trailer, the impact sending him sprawling onto the asphalt. Another skidded sideways, barely avoiding his fallen comrade. Victoria didn't give them a chance to recover. She floored the gas. The 18-wheeler surged forward, a beast of steel and momentum, roaring down the highway at full speed. She checked the mirrors. Venom was still upright, his face twisted in fury as he gunned his engine, closing in again. Max barked sharply, one of their preset signals. New threat incoming. Victoria snapped her gaze to the right. A second wave of bikers was merging onto the highway from a dirt access road up ahead. At least 5 of them. Damn it. They were hurting her, pushing her toward a kill zone. She exhaled sharply. Think. Adapt. Act. Elena's voice crackled through the radio. Vic, they've got a blockade set up 2 miles ahead. You need an exit now. Victoria's mind raced. The terrain was unforgiving desert, dry creek beds, and nowhere to hide. But then she saw it, a narrow service road cutting into the hills. Rough, isolated, but maneuverable. She clicked her tongue twice, a command Max and Duke knew well. Prepare to engage. Then she jerked the wheel and took the turn at full speed, the truck thundering off the main highway. If the Sand Scorpions wanted a fight, they were about to get one on her terms. Victoria gritted her teeth as the 18-wheeler jolted violently over the uneven service road. Dust kicked up in thick clouds behind her, momentarily obscuring the bikers giving chase. It wouldn't last. The Sand Scorpions weren't just some ragtag highway gang. They were organized, aggressive, and worst of all, experienced. Venom Jackson had built his crew into something more than just outlaw bikers. They were predators, and right now she was their target. But unlike the unfortunate truckers they'd terrorized before, Victoria Parker wasn't prey. She'd spent over a decade in the military as a specialized K9 handler, running combat operations in some of the world's most hostile regions. She and her dogs Max and Duke had seen more action than most soldiers. Explosives detection, high-risk extractions, urban warfare. There wasn't a battlefield scenario they hadn't trained for. After her discharge, she tried to leave that life behind, taking up long-haul trucking to escape the ghosts of war. But old habits died hard. Her 18-wheeler wasn't just a truck, it was modified, reinforced, and prepped for situations exactly like this. Max let out a sharp bark, his body tense with focus. Duke remained low behind the passenger seat, his sharp eyes tracking the bikers in the mirror. They knew the routine. They'd spent years working together, operating as a single unit. Victoria's hands remained steady on the wheel, scanning for her next move. The service road twisted ahead, winding through rocky hills and dry ravines. If she played this right, she could shake them before they reached the blockade Elena had warned her about. The radio crackled again. "Vic, talk to me." Elena's voice came in, strained but steady. "Are you clear?" "Not yet," Victoria replied, swerving around a sharp bend, feeling the trailer's weight shift dangerously. "Still have a pack on me." "How bad is the blockade?" "They've got 3 vehicles across the road. Armed. Not just pistols either. Looked like rifles." Victoria's jaw tightened. That confirmed what she already suspected. This wasn't just a random highway shakedown. The Scorpions had intel. They knew what she was carrying, and they'd set up this ambush for a reason. But how? The cargo in her trailer wasn't ordinary freight. It was a shipment of high-value medical supplies headed to Houston. Critical medications, experimental treatments, the kind of stuff that could save lives. More importantly, the kind of stuff that could be sold for a fortune on the black market. And that meant someone had tipped them off. "Who else knows my route?" Victoria asked, her mind racing. Elena hesitated. "Not many people. Dispatch, obviously. A few other drivers. But someone sold me out," Victoria finished for her. The realization settled like a weight in her gut, but she pushed it aside. Survive first. Figure out the leak later. The bikers behind her were closing in. Victoria's sharp eyes caught movement in her side mirror. One of them was pulling a Molotov cocktail from his saddlebag. "Oh, hell no," she muttered. Without hesitation, she hit another switch on her dashboard. The modified exhaust system released a sudden burst of thick, black smoke, billowing into the air like a solid wall. The biker with the Molotov panicked, swerving hard to avoid crashing into his own men. The bottle slipped from his grasp, shattering uselessly onto the dirt road. Venom's furious voice rang out behind her, but she wasn't slowing down to hear what he had to say. Ahead, the service road split, one path leading back toward the main highway, the other winding deeper into the rocky terrain. A gamble, but she knew which one she had to take. "Boys, hang on," she warned. Then she took the rougher path at full speed. The truck bounced violently as Victoria pushed deeper into the uneven terrain. The service road was barely wide enough for her rig, flanked by steep rocky slopes on one side and a sharp drop on the other. The sand scorpions weren't giving up. Even with the smoke screen slowing them down, they adjusted fast, their bikes maneuvering with dangerous precision. Venom Jackson was no fool. He built his crew from men who knew how to handle a chase. The problem was, he wasn't the only one with experience. Victoria had spent years evading insurgents in the Middle East, running convoys through ambush zones where every road was a potential death trap. This was just another battlefield, and she knew how to turn the terrain to her advantage. Max let out another sharp bark, another warning. Victoria caught sight of a biker creeping up on her right flank, too close for comfort. His left hand clutched a chain, the hook at the end swinging ominously. He was waiting for the right moment to throw it, probably aiming to catch her side mirror, or, worse, one of the truck's front axles. She couldn't let that happen. With a flick of her wrist, Victoria sent the truck into a controlled swerve, kicking up a fresh cloud of dust and debris. The biker hesitated, adjusting too late. His bike wobbled, tires slipping on loose gravel. Then, with a sickening crunch, he lost control completely, skidding sideways into the rocks. Victoria didn't have time to check if he was still conscious. Another one was already closing in, a rifle slung across his back. "Elena, I need an update." She barked into the radio. "Blockade is still up," Elena's voice crackled back. "But I've got Nash on the line. He's sending units." "Not fast enough," Victoria muttered. She glanced at the road ahead. A sharp incline. Perfect. If she timed it right, she could use the terrain to force the bikers into a disadvantage. She gritted her teeth and floored the accelerator, pushing the truck harder than it was ever meant to go. The incline was steep, the engine groaning under the strain, but she knew what she was doing. The bikers weren't expecting it. Their heavy motorcycles struggled against the sudden change in terrain, their formation breaking apart. At the crest of the incline, Victoria spotted what she was looking for, a dry riverbed cutting through the rock. It was narrow, just barely wide enough for her truck, but it gave her an idea. "Boys, get ready," she muttered. Max and Duke were already in position. They knew the plan. Victoria jerked the wheel, sending the truck crashing down into the riverbed, the impact rattling through her bones. Behind her, the remaining bikers tried to follow, but the steep descent was brutal. Two of them wiped out instantly, their bikes slamming hard into the rocks. The others hesitated, unsure whether to press forward or regroup. That hesitation cost them. Victoria seized the moment, shifting gears and tearing through the dry riverbed like a battering ram. She wasn't just escaping, she was controlling the battlefield, dictating the fight on her terms. She spotted a break in the rock wall ahead, a narrow passage leading back toward the open road. It was tight, risky, but she had no choice. She took the turn without slowing down. The truck roared back onto asphalt. Alina's voice came through again. "Vic, blockade just got a hole in it. If you gun it now, you can make it through before they regroup." Victoria didn't need to be told twice. She gripped the wheel, eyes locked on the distant break in the blockade. Venom's men were scrambling, trying to reposition their vehicles, but they weren't fast enough. She had momentum. She had force. And most importantly, she had no intention of stopping. She pushed the accelerator to the floor. Victoria's 18-wheeler tore down the asphalt like a charging beast, the massive engine roaring as she pushed the speedometer past its limit. The blockade loomed ahead, 3 vehicles stretched across the highway, their drivers scrambling as they realized she wasn't slowing down. The Sand Scorpions had underestimated her once. They wouldn't get a second chance. She braced herself as the gap came into view, a tight space between 2 trucks, barely wide enough for her rig. But barely was all she needed. "Hold on, boys," she warned. Max and Duke crouched low, their trained bodies anticipating the impact. Victoria yanked the wheel at the last possible second. The 18-wheeler skidded sideways, its reinforced side panel scraping against one of the blockade trucks with a deafening screech of metal. Sparks flew. The trailer fishtailed wildly, but she kept control, muscling the rig through the gap with inches to spare. Then she was through. Behind her, the blockade erupted into chaos. One of the Scorpion's vehicles got clipped by her trailer, sending it spinning out of control. Bikers scattered, some diving for cover, others scrambling onto their bikes in a desperate attempt to catch up. Victoria didn't look back. She didn't have to. The CB radio crackled. "Hell of a move, Parker," Elena's voice came through, laced with adrenaline. "But you're not in the clear yet." Victoria checked her side mirrors. 3 bikers had managed to slip through the wreckage and were closing fast. Venom was one of them. "Damn persistent," she muttered. Her truck was built for endurance, not speed. On a straight highway, the bikers had the advantage. But Victoria never fought fair. She spotted an upcoming overpass with an old construction exit, an unfinished ramp leading down to an abandoned service road. Risky. Unstable. Dangerous. Perfect. She veered hard onto the ramp, the truck lurching as it hit uneven pavement. Dust billowed behind her, limiting visibility. The bikers followed, undeterred. Venom led the charge, his expression a mix of rage and exhilaration. He thought he had her cornered. He was wrong. Victoria flicked another hidden switch on the dashboard. A steel panel on the back of her trailer slid open. Venom barely had time to react before the payload deployed industrial-grade tire spikes, camouflaged in the dust cloud. The effect was immediate. The first biker hit the spikes at full speed. His front tire blew out, sending him flying over the handlebars. The second swerved too late, his bike skidding sideways before slamming into the guardrail. Venom reacted faster than the others, cutting left at the last second, barely avoiding the trap. His back tire wobbled, but he recovered, gritting his teeth as he gunned the throttle. Victoria's respect for him ticked up a fraction. He was good, but not good enough. She adjusted her mirrors, eyes locking onto his. Then she did something that sent a clear message. She smiled. Venom's eyes darkened with realization. She was playing with him. Before he could react, Victoria yanked the wheel again, sending the truck down a narrow dirt path. The road twisted sharply, terrain shifting from asphalt to loose gravel. It was a death trap for bikes at high speed. Venom hesitated. Just for a second. It was all she needed. Victoria punched the gas. The 18-wheeler barreled forward, its massive weight giving her the advantage on the unstable ground. Behind her, Venom struggled to keep control, his bike fishtailing as he fought to adjust. Then the path ended. A sheer drop-off into a dry canyon yawned ahead. Victoria had memorized this terrain. She knew there was a steep but navigable descent just off to the right. But Venom? He had no such advantage. She didn't slow down, didn't hesitate. The truck lunged over the edge. Max and Duke stayed perfectly still, trusting her completely. Venom wasn't as lucky. The last thing Victoria saw in her mirror was his bike twisting sideways as he hit the edge, the momentum too much to recover. Then she was gone, swallowed by the canyon. Victoria barely had time to regain control as the truck barreled down the rocky path. The descent was sharp, every bump threatening to throw her off course, but she held firm. The canyon walls closed in around her, offering a temporary reprieve from the open road, but also limiting her maneuverability. It was a calculated risk. Max's ears perked up, his body shifting slightly, his signal for incoming threat. Victoria caught movement in her side mirror. A single biker had made it down, his headlight bouncing wildly as he struggled to keep his bike steady on the rough terrain. Not just any biker. Venom Jackson. Victoria exhaled sharply. Persistent bastard. Venom's face was twisted with fury, his knuckles white against the handlebars. He was riding reckless, hell-bent on finishing what he started. Victoria didn't need to hear his voice to know exactly what he was thinking. You embarrassed me. Now you pay. He reached into his jacket, something glinted in the moonlight. Victoria reacted instantly. She hit the brakes hard. The truck skidded, kicking up a wall of dust and debris, momentarily blinding Venom. His bike wobbled, but he didn't stop. Then, from the shadows, Duke launched. The German Shepherd moved like a missile, leaping from the side compartment of the truck. Venom barely had time to register the attack before Duke's powerful jaws clamped down on his forearm, the one holding the weapon. Venom roared in pain, his bike jerking violently as he struggled to shake Duke off. But Duke wasn't trained to let go. His grip tightened, his body twisting midair to maximize leverage. Venom lost control. His bike slammed into a boulder, flipping end over end before crashing down in a mess of twisted metal. Duke disengaged at the last second, landing gracefully on the ground just as Venom was thrown from the wreckage. Victoria yanked the wheel, bringing the truck to a halt. She grabbed her sidearm and jumped out, her boots crunching against the gravel. Max was already at her side, his muscles coiled, eyes locked on the unmoving figure sprawled on the ground. Venom groaned, rolling onto his back. His arm was a bloody mess, his jacket shredded where Duke's teeth had torn through. His bike was totaled. He wasn't going anywhere. Victoria stepped closer, gun trained on him. Stay down. Venom coughed, spitting dust and blood. But then he did something unexpected. He laughed. Damn, he rasped, wincing. Didn't think you had it in you, Parker. Victoria didn't lower the gun. Who tipped you off? Venom chuckled again, but there was something dark behind his eyes. You think this was just us? We were just the first wave. A cold chill ran down Victoria's spine. What's in that truck of yours, Venom continued, smirking through the pain, is worth more than you can imagine. And you're not the only one who knows about it. Victoria didn't hesitate. She slammed the butt of her gun against his temple. Venom's head snapped back and he went limp. She exhaled sharply, signaling Duke to stand down. Max nudged her leg, his way of asking what's next. Victoria holstered her weapon. She needed answers. Fast. She turned back to the truck, the weight of Venom's words settling in. If the Sand Scorpions were just the beginning, she was in a hell of a lot more trouble than she thought. Victoria gripped the wheel tighter as the 18-wheeler thundered down the steep canyon path. Dust and loose gravel kicked up in thick clouds behind her, masking her escape route. The descent was brutal, each jolt rattling her bones, but she kept control. Max and Duke remained still, their bodies tense but unshaken. They trusted her. They always had. By the time she reached the canyon floor, she risked a glance in the mirror. No sign of venom. His bike hadn't made the drop, or if it had, he wasn't riding it anymore. But she knew better than to assume he was out of the fight. "Elena, talk to me," she said, hitting the CB radio. Static. Then a crackle. "Vic, I lost visual on you after the drop. What the hell was that move? A shortcut. Jesus. You alive? Mostly." Elena exhaled. "All right, listen. That blockade wasn't just a stick-up. These guys had automatic weapons, reinforced vehicles. Someone bankrolled this. Hard." Victoria's jaw tightened. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" There was a pause. Then Elena cursed under her breath. This wasn't about the truck. It was about what's in it. Victoria already knew it. The Sand Scorpions hadn't just been after a random high-value shipment. They knew exactly what she was hauling. That meant someone had leaked her route. Someone with access. She flexed her fingers against the wheel, forcing her breathing to steady. This wasn't just a highway gang shaking down truckers. This was bigger. Planned. Coordinated. Funded. "Elena, I need a name." "Working on it," she replied. "But you're not gonna like this. There's chatter on the channels. Someone else is looking for that cargo. Not just the Scorpions." Victoria's pulse quickened. "Who?" "I don't know yet. But if they want those supplies this bad, you're sitting on a goldmine of trouble." Victoria's mind raced. The medical cargo she was carrying, specialized treatments, high-value pharmaceuticals, was meant for critical pediatric patients in Houston. But if criminals were this desperate to get their hands on it, the implications were chilling. She checked her side mirrors. No headlights. No movement. The canyon had bought her time, but not much. "Elena, I need a safe place to lay low." Walker's truck stop. Off Highway 87. Dome Walker's ex-military, solid guy. He keeps his place locked down. Victoria nodded to herself. Dome Walker had a reputation among truckers, old school, no nonsense. If he was willing to shelter her, she'd take it. "Copy that. I'll check in soon." She switched off the radio, refocused. The canyon path opened up ahead, leading back to an old mining road that would take her north. She gunned the engine. Time to disappear. But something gnawed at her. The Sand Scorpions weren't smart enough to pull off an operation like this alone. Someone had given them intel. Someone higher up. And she intended to find out who. Victoria kept the truck steady as she followed the old mining road toward Walker's truck stop. The adrenaline from the chase was wearing off, replaced by a cold, calculating focus. Venom's words echoed in her mind. "We were just the first wave. Someone with serious resources had set this up." The Sand Scorpions were dangerous, but they weren't masterminds. They were muscle-blunt instruments used to soften the target. Which meant the real threat was still out there, watching, waiting for her next move. Max and Duke remained alert. They could sense her tension. Victoria reached down, giving Max a quick scratch behind the ears. "We're not done yet, boys." The lights of Walker's truck stop came into view, a lone beacon in the vast Arizona desert. The place wasn't large, but it was well fortified. A few rigs were parked outside, their owners either grabbing a meal or catching a few hours of rest. But Victoria knew better than to assume this was just another stop on the highway. Walker had built this place for more than just truckers. She pulled around the back, away from prying eyes, and killed the engine. Before she could step out, a shadow moved near the garage entrance. A man in his late 50s, broad-shouldered, wearing a grease-stained work shirt and a sharp gaze that missed nothing. Dome Walker. He wiped his hands on a rag as he approached, his eyes flicking to the dents and dust coating her rig. Then to the two dogs watching him intently from the cab. "Hell of a night, Parker." Victoria climbed down, rolling her shoulders. "You have no idea." Walker nodded toward the truck. This about the shipment? She narrowed her eyes. You know, word travels fast. He gestured for her to follow him inside. Come on. You'll want to see this. Victoria hesitated for half a second, then gave a quick whistle. Max and Duke jumped down, falling into step beside her as she followed Walker into the garage. Inside, the air smelled of motor oil and coffee. A large workbench was cluttered with tools, maps, and a few scattered documents. A radio hummed in the background, cycling through CB chatter. Walker grabbed a folder and tossed it onto the table. Your shipment's not just medicine. Victoria flipped it open. Shipping manifests. Cargo details. But one section was highlighted restricted pharmaceutical compounds. Her stomach tightened. These are military grade. Walker nodded. Some of those meds can be repurposed for less than legal uses. High-value stuff on the black market. That explained why the Sand Scorpions wanted it. But it didn't explain everything. This wasn't just a hijacking, she muttered. Someone leaked my route. Someone high up. Walker leaned against the workbench, arms crossed. Got a name for you. Victoria's eyes snapped up. He handed her a grainy surveillance photo. A man in his 40s, lean, sharp features, military posture. Crimson. The name sent a chill through her. She knew it. Everyone in her line of work did. A former Special Forces officer gone rogue, Crimson had built a reputation in the shadows training mercenaries, running black market operations, and apparently hijacking military-grade supplies. Walker exhaled. If Crimson's involved, this ain't just about stealing meds. He's building something. Victoria clenched her fists. She'd dealt with men like him before. And she knew one thing for sure. If Crimson was after her cargo, he wouldn't stop until he got it. And she had no intention of letting that happen. Victoria sat across from Walker in the dimly lit garage, the weight of the situation settling in. Crimson wasn't just another outlaw looking for a payday. He was calculated, methodical, a predator who didn't make a move unless the odds were stacked in his favor. If he wanted her shipment, it meant he had a plan. And if he had a plan, it meant he was already ahead of her. Walker took a slow sip of coffee, watching her carefully. You look like someone trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. Victoria exhaled, running a hand through her dust-coated hair. Because that's exactly what this is. Crimson wouldn't have gone through the trouble of hiring the Sand Scorpions if he didn't have a backup plan. Walker nodded. Which means he's still out there, waiting for you to make the next move. She leaned forward. That's the problem. Right now, he has the advantage. He knows where I am, he knows what I'm carrying, and he knows I'll have to move eventually. Walker set his mug down. So change the rules. Victoria met his gaze. You're thinking like a soldier, he continued. You see an enemy, you counter their attack. But Crimson? He's playing a different game. He's waiting for you to react, to do what he expects. She mulled over his words. Walker was right. She'd spent years running tactical ops, responding to threats as they happened. But this wasn't a battlefield. It was a chessboard. And right now, she was playing defense. That had to change. She tapped a finger against the folder on the table. If he expects me to run, I stay put. If he thinks I'll fight head-on, I go dark. Walker smirked. Now you're thinking like a hunter. She stood pacing. Crimson's biggest asset is his intel. He knew my route, which means he has someone feeding him information. But if I disappear, if I make it look like I never made it here, Walker's grin widened. Then he starts making mistakes. Victoria glanced at Max and Duke, both watching her intently. She'd spent years training them to recognize psychological shifts in a target, to anticipate movements before they happened. Now she needed to use that same skill against Crimson. She turned back to Walker. We're going to stage an accident." Walker raised an eyebrow. "You sure about that?" Victoria's eyes were cold. "I don't need Crimson to think he's lost me." She grabbed the truck keys. "I need him to think I'm dead." Walker didn't question her plan. He simply nodded and got to work. Within minutes, they had everything they needed. A wrecked truck frame from the scrapyard behind the garage, a few well-placed incendiary devices, and enough debris to make it look convincing. Victoria drove her rig a few miles out onto an abandoned stretch of road, where Walker and Elena were already setting the stage. She parked, grabbed her gear, and whistled for Max and Duke to follow. They moved swiftly, knowing time was against them. Elena poured fuel over the wreckage, stepping back as Walker rigged the explosion. "Once this goes up, you vanish," he said. "No radio, no signals, nothing. You give Crimson even a whisper of your location, and he'll know this was staged." Victoria nodded. The hardest part wouldn't be disappearing. It would be waiting for Crimson to take the bait. Walker handed her the detonator. She took one last glance at her truck. It had carried her through hell and back, but now it was a pawn in a bigger game. She pressed the button. The explosion rocked the night, sending flames and smoke into the sky. The wreckage was perfect charred metal, shattered glass, just enough to suggest a fatal accident. Elena tossed a burnt scrap of Victoria's jacket into the wreck, adding credibility to the illusion. They didn't have long before someone, police, truckers, or worse, Crimson's men showed up. Victoria slung her pack over her shoulder and disappeared into the desert with Max and Duke at her heels. She had to go dark, let Crimson believe she was gone. But she wasn't running. She was hunting. Victoria crouched low behind a ridge, the cold desert wind whipping against her as she peered through her binoculars. Below, illuminated by the pale moonlight, was Crimson's operation in full force. The plateau served as a staging ground. Several reinforced SUVs were parked in a tight formation, their black exteriors barely visible against the rocky terrain. A cargo truck, nearly identical to hers, was positioned near the center. Her cargo. He had intercepted a backup shipment. Max and Duke lay silent beside her, their bodies tensed, eyes locked on the scene below. They sensed the danger, the electricity in the air before the storm. Elena's voice crackled softly in her earpiece. "Vic, you seeing this?" Loud and clear, she murmured. "Crimson's setting up for a move. He's not waiting anymore." Walker's voice cut in. "That's because he thinks you're dead. He's getting reckless." Victoria allowed herself a small smile. Perfect. She scanned the site again, noting the positions of Crimson's men. At least 15 visible guards, heavily armed. But more importantly, they were running a defensive formation. They weren't expecting an attack. That was their mistake. She pulled back, signaling to Elena. "Get into position. We hit them hard and fast. No drawn-out fight. We take the cargo, take Crimson, and get out before his reinforcements arrive." Walker chuckled. "You make it sound easy." Victoria smirked. "That's because I know what I'm doing." She signaled Max and Duke. They moved instantly, flanking her as she descended toward the enemy position. Time to end this. Victoria moved swiftly through the rocky terrain, keeping low as she closed the distance. Max and Duke shadowed her every step, their breathing controlled, their muscles primed for action. She counted down in her head, sensing her approach with Elena and Walker. The moment had to be perfect. Crimson's men were relaxed, thinking they had all the time in the world. That illusion was about to shatter. She reached the outer perimeter, pressing against a boulder for cover. A guard stood just ahead, cigarette glowing in the dark. He never saw Max coming. The dog launched silently, teeth clamping around his arm, dragging him down before he could make a sound. Victoria caught him as he fell, slamming the butt of her pistol into his temple. One down. She signaled Duke toward the next sentry. The German shepherd weaved through the shadows, a ghost in the night. The guard barely had time to react before Duke struck, his powerful jaws clamping down on the man's weapon hand. A muffled grunt, a sharp takedown, and the second threat was neutralized. Elena's voice crackled in her earpiece. "We're in position." Victoria exhaled. "Showtime." She flicked a small switch on her vest, triggering a signal for Walker. A second later, the plateau exploded in light and sound. Walker's rig, parked just beyond the ridge, blasted its high beams and let loose a deafening horn. Crimson's men spun in confusion, momentarily blinded. Victoria seized the chaos. She sprinted toward the cargo truck, Max and Duke tearing through the battlefield with her. Gunfire erupted. Elena's team returned fire, keeping Crimson's men pinned down. Victoria slid beneath the truck, planting a small device on the undercarriage, a failsafe in case things went south. A shadow loomed. She rolled, firing twice. The guard crumpled. She pushed forward, heart hammering, instincts razor sharp. Then she heard the voice. Cold, amused, cutting through the chaos like a knife. "I have to admit, Parker, you put on a hell of a show." Victoria's blood ran cold. She turned slowly. Crimson stood atop a nearby crate, rifle slung casually over his shoulder. He wasn't running. He was waiting. A predator in his element. And worst of all, he was smiling. Victoria kept her gun trained on Crimson, but he didn't flinch. He stood there, completely at ease, as if the chaos unfolding around them was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. His men were still pinned down by Elena's team, and Walker's truck continued blasting its horn, adding to the disorientation. But Crimson, he was calm. That made him even more dangerous. "I have to say, Parker," he continued, stepping down from the crate with calculated ease. "Faking your own death? Clever. Almost had me fooled." She didn't respond. Words were pointless with men like him. Crimson smirked. "But let's be honest. This isn't about the shipment anymore, is it? You could have run. You could have disappeared. But you didn't. You came back." He tilted his head. "Why?" Victoria's grip tightened on her pistol. "Because you don't get to walk away from this." He chuckled, shaking his head. "That's where you're wrong." Before she could react, a sharp whistle pierced the air. A signal. 3 gunmen emerged from the shadows, weapons trained on her. She barely had time to shift before a 4th appeared at her flank, pressing a rifle to her ribs. "Damn it." Max and Duke snarled, muscles coiled to attack, but she gave a quick, sharp whistle of her own. "Stand down." They froze, though their bodies trembled with restrained aggression. Crimson sighed, almost disappointed. "I admire you, Parker. Really, I do. But the thing about war?" He leaned in slightly. "It's not about who's right. It's about who's left." She clenched her jaw. "You lost." He raised his hand. The gunman beside her tightened his grip, ready to pull the trigger. Victoria moved. She twisted, slamming her elbow into the man's throat, knocking his rifle upward as the shot rang out wide and useless. Max and Duke sprang into action, launching at the nearest gunman. The night erupted into chaos again. Victoria ducked low, rolling behind a stack of crates as bullets tore through the air. She had seconds, maybe less, to shift the fight back in her favor. Crimson was already moving, retreating toward the cargo truck. Not this time. She surged forward. Victoria moved fast, weaving through the gunfire as Max and Duke tore into Crimson's men with brutal precision. She saw Crimson reach for the truck's cab, trying to escape, but she was already closing the distance. He yanked the door open, 1 foot on the step, when she crashed into him, tackling him hard against the metal. They grappled, fists and elbows colliding in a vicious struggle for control. Crimson was strong, trained. but Victoria had spent years fighting men like him. She twisted his arm, forcing his wrist against the edge of the door, and heard the sharp crack of bone. He grunted, pain flashing across his face, but he wasn't done yet. His free hand shot toward the pistol at his hip. Victoria reacted instantly. She slammed her knee into his gut, then spun him around, slamming his face into the truck's frame. The gun slipped from his fingers. She kicked it away. "It's over," she growled, pressing her forearm against his throat. Crimson wheezed, but his smirk remained. "Is it?" A deafening explosion rocked the plateau. Victoria's head snapped up. One of Crimson's men had triggered an emergency charge, blowing apart Walker's truck in a desperate attempt to scatter the opposition. The blast sent a shockwave through the battlefield. Elena's voice shouted something through the radio, but it was lost in the chaos. Crimson used the distraction. With a last burst of strength, he wrenched free, twisting his injured arm painfully but breaking Victoria's hold. He staggered back, blood dripping from his forehead, but his eyes burned with something other than defeat. He wasn't planning to win. He was planning to disappear. He lunged sideways, grabbing a detonator from his belt. Victoria's stomach dropped. The failsafe she'd planted under the cargo truck, it was still active. If Crimson triggered it, the entire shipment would be lost. And worse, the explosion could take out Max Duke and everyone else still fighting. Time slowed. Victoria reached for her weapon, leveling it in one fluid motion. Crimson's thumb pressed the detonator. She fired. The shot punched through his shoulder, sending the device spinning from his grasp. Crimson staggered, his smirk finally gone, replaced by the dull shock of a man who had finally run out of options. He fell to his knees, clutching his wound, blinking up at her in disbelief. Victoria lowered her gun, breathing hard. "You don't get to walk away." Max and Duke stood at her sides, their fur bristling, their eyes locked onto the fallen man. Sirens echoed in the distance. Backup had arrived. Crimson's empire was finished. The fight was over. But Victoria knew one thing for certain. There would always be another battle. Another war waiting in the shadows. She looked at Max and Duke, then at the burning wreckage behind them. Freedom came at a price, and she was willing to pay it.